Welcome to IVF This, episode 52, a year of IVF This. Welcome to IVF This. I'm your host, Emily Ginn. I'm a mother to two beautiful and feral boys. I'm married to my favorite person in the world. I'm a social worker, a life coach, and an IVF warrior. I'm here to teach you how to manage your mind and emotions during your IVF journey, to break free from anxiety and regain control of your life, even in the midst of infertility. I'm going to teach you to say IVF this to how we think about, talk about, and experience infertility. Let's go. Hello, my beautiful friends. Today's episode marks 52 weeks of podcasts. It has been a whole year, y'all. Well, I got really texting there on that one, but it's kind of mind-blowing that this has been a whole year. We've covered a lot of topics throughout this year, so I thought it would be nice if we went through what I think are the four most important things for any of us to remember throughout our journeys. So think of it as like the Cliff Notes edition of IVF This. So first things first, our thoughts create our feelings. This is the framework that I use in my coaching practice. Our thoughts create our feelings every time. Things happen all the time, and it doesn't mean anything until we have a thought about it. This is such an important topic that I covered in the very first episode of this podcast. What we think creates how we feel. Based on how we feel, we take specific actions. Based on those three things, we create three different types of results in our lives. Results that mirror our thoughts, results that are the opposite of our thoughts, or the result is that we create more evidence to support that thought or belief. So let me give you some examples. So if your thought is you are terrified of injections, when you think about that, injections, you maybe feel anxious. When you feel anxious, you ruminate about all of your fears. You fixate on the physical or perceived pain of the injections. You start forecasting all of the terrible things that could and might happen. So then your result is that you remain terrified of injections. So that's the mirroring. Some people call it a thought loop. It's the same thing. So the second example is when you create the opposite. So that's like telling yourself, I have to eat perfectly leading up to my cycle. Well, when you think you have to do something, anything, most of us feel pressured, overwhelmed, or something similar. When we feel pressured or overwhelmed, we will often do things that we find comfort in. Eating, binge watching Netflix, drinking, etc. When we berate and judge ourselves for the completely normal human reaction, and the cycle continues. The result is that you will likely not be eating perfectly. Number one, because perfectly, let's just break it down, doesn't exist. It never has. Perfection is subjective. What is perfect for me is probably not perfect for pretty much anyone else in this world. So that's about 7 billion different ideas of what quote unquote perfect is. But also, and this is really important to remember, it is damn near impossible to take positive action. I want to make that really clear, to take positive action from a negative feeling. Does this mean that people can't, say, lose weight when they hate their bodies? Sure. Most women, in particular, are used to white-knuckling our way through life and certainly through dieting. But white-knuckling has a shelf life, and it's about as long as an avocado is ready to be eaten. Sure, more often than not, we get caught back in the cycle of eating or drinking or whatever it is, the habit that we're trying to break, to feel better because we're spending so much time bullying ourselves. The behaviors you don't like are behaviors you are using to get a reprieve from you. And finally, the last one, building more evidence. This is probably one of the most common results that we see as coaches, that I see with my specific clients. So let's take the thought, my body can't do the one thing it's supposed to do, which is probably one of the most common thoughts that I hear from clients, from the infertility community, all of them. So when you think that, you might feel like a failure, disgusted with yourself, hopeless, resentful, really anything. So your actions are to scrutinize every perceived failure that you or your body have. It's like the worst cataloging in the world. Oh, you forgot to bring your lunch today? Well, you're a failure. You had 2 drinks the day before you started stims? Failure. You've thrown yourself headlong into the "it starts with the egg" lifestyle philosophy and find it unsustainable? You're a failure. When you catalog anything, you are building evidence to support that belief. Our brains are like these amazing collectors of information. That's what they're designed for. They're not designed to be containers of information, but collectors of information. So you give your brain a directive, which is a thought like, I'm alone in this journey. Well, then your brain is going to roll up its sleeves, ask someone to hold its beer, and get to work finding and sometimes curating evidence to support that belief. All of the times you have physically or emotionally felt alone, all of it, your brain will go through all of it like an auditor. So those are the 3 ways, which brings me to point number 2. We spend far more time listening to ourselves than we do talking to ourselves. It's like 90 to 95% of the time, we're just listening to the constant barrage of BS that our brains throw out. Our brains have taken in decades of stimulus, social and cultural messaging, and media influence. And then you couple that with the thousands of years of evolutionary biology that have molded our brains to think in an inherently negative way, to keep us on high alert for danger. Hello, anxiety. And then you add in trauma, which fundamentally changes the structure of your brain and the ability to process, comprehend, and cope with information. Ladies, it's no friggin' wonder why our brains can be such assholes. 90-ish% of our thinking is subconscious. The subconscious part of our brain rather, is where all of this stuff resides. The subconscious part of our brain is like the drunk asshole at a sports stadium, just throwing out random insults, phrases, commentaries. Now, we need the unconscious or subconscious parts of our brain. We need most of the things that we do to run automatically, like in the background, breathing, walking, all of these things. If everything we did required the energy and attention of what is required when we're, say, learning a new skill, our brains would explode. They would fry out and we wouldn't be able to function. So the fact that this is happening is not a problem. The problem is that when the drunk idiot in our brain starts spouting off the BS, we just believe it at face value. We don't even think to question it. What's that you say, brain? I'm broken? Yep, you're right. Here's all of the ways that's true. Oh, you're maybe right. We're too old to have a baby. That's true. I Googled it. The average age for a woman's first child is 29.3. So literally whatever age you are, you're too old. It can absolutely be anything that your brain offers you, and we just gobble it up without a care in the world. This is why we feel like garbage most of the time. And that's why we need to start talking to ourselves more than listening. And by talking to ourselves, I mean reminding yourself that it's okay to feel grief or sadness or anxiety without blaming it on yourself. That you did something wrong, because newsflash, you didn't, because that's what your brain is going to try and focus on. Because it feels more empowering to blame something than to actually feel your feelings. So tell your brain, we don't actually have to blame anything. We can feel sad, literally any emotion, not just sadness, any emotion. We can tell our brain, hey, I know why you're telling me that I need to do more to be thinner or eat this way or whatever should statement is in the background. But shoulds are not truth. More often than not, there's social messaging that we receive to fit this specific cultural mold that is unattainable and unsustainable. Tell your brain that today you are going to focus on these things, whatever they are, gratitude, goals, whatever. And you can tell your brain, which is probably one of my things to tell myself, oh, love, we just don't talk to ourselves like that anymore. Now, does this mean I'm never an asshole to myself? Hardly. The goal is never perfection, but I sure as hell am a lot less of an asshole than I was to myself even 1 year ago. And that's certainly something. When you let go of those asshole beliefs and don't automatically believe them, my friends, peace is on the other side of that equation. All right. Now, number 3, feelings are not the enemy. Anxiety, grief, shame, the multitude of other uncomfortable feelings, they're not the enemy. We don't like them and they don't feel comfortable in our bodies, but they're not the enemy. We have been taught that we should feel good and happy and shiny all the time, which is kind of ridiculous when you think about it. If that were true, I guess you could try to feel happy and good all of the time, but that means you would need to feel good and happy about things like miscarriage, failed transfers, failed cycles, death, murder, rape, racism, all of the horrible things that do actually exist in our world. In order for us to be happy all the time, we would have to feel happy about these things. I don't know about you, but when we had our failed transfer, I didn't want to feel happy about that, not even a little bit. I wanted to feel sad. I wanted to feel that loss. That's how I knew I wanted it so badly. That's how I knew how much I already loved and was mothering that M baby. That was the price I was willing to pay for that love. Did I want to pay it? Not really. It felt terrible. I cried a lot. I'm not a crier. Not a big crier, at least. I shut down. I got sad a lot. And it was also followed by one of the most challenging times in mine and my husband's marriage. But to pretend to be happy would have been a complete disservice to myself and to that little life. Another aspect of this is the feelings are not a monolith, meaning that we don't usually feel only one emotion at a time. For instance, after our failed transfer, I felt sadness and love, just like I was talking about a second ago. Going into a cycle, we can often feel anxiety and excitement, or anxiety and hope. Hell, even when a loved one dies, we can feel grief and relief. Maybe they'd been sick for a while or something. The point is that we often tell ourselves that we should feel this way or that way, one feeling. But anytime my clients have told me this and we dig in, we find that we often do feel that emotion. It's just kind of jumbled and tangled up with other emotions because that is the emotional complexity of being human. And the final point I want to make about emotions is that we do not need to judge them. This kind of speaks to that last point I made about emotions not being a monolith. The problem that probably would not need to be said if we didn't judge ourselves for how we feel. Oh, I'm a terrible person because I'm jealous of this person. No, you're not. You're human who wants something desperately, and that person is reminding you of what you want and reminding you of your grief. That doesn't make you a terrible person. Feelings do not make people terrible. They make people human. One of the ways we create more of whatever negative feeling we are experiencing is by judging it. I shouldn't feel this way or that. I hate that I feel this way or that. If you stop and drop the judgment, you're already going to be experiencing less of the emotion. You're going to be experiencing the emotion differently. because you're not fighting against it. You can tell yourself this is not an emotion you enjoy experiencing, and here you are. Emotions don't need to be fixed. They need to be felt, experienced, and then they move through you. And finally, the single most important thing, the thing that will help you the most during this time, compassion. You knew it had to come at some point, right? It's my favorite thing in the world. Compassion, compassion, compassion. Compassion for what you think. Compassion for how you feel. Compassion for your pain. Compassion for your grief. Compassion for your jealousy. Compassion for you all day long. Compassion for the days when you don't want to change out of your PJs and you watch Netflix all day and you kind of smell funky and maybe you ordered some greasy takeout. Compassion for when you eat all of the things, you binge eat your pantry. Compassion when you yell or are grumpy with the people that you love. Compassion for when something is okay for other people, but you are being incredibly hard on yourself about the same thing. Compassion. The point has never and will never be that we don't have negative emotions, that nothing terrible ever happens to you. The point will always be how you can learn to love yourself through it. In any moment, whatever is happening, you always have the option of stopping and asking yourself, what is the most loving thing I can do for myself right now? Speak to yourself as though you are your best friend, your most treasured and beloved person in your life. The way we typically bully ourselves, specifically how we bully our brains, is so harmful. We tell ourselves that we hate how we think, that we hate our brains for doing exactly what they were designed to do, thinking the exact way they were designed to think. Think of your brain. I want you to do this. I want you to actually visualize your brain as this 3, 6, 9, 12-year-old kid. When you tell your brain, I don't want you, I hate you, you're broken, you're defective, you're miserable. You are telling that to the 3, 6, 9, 12-year-old version of yourself. We would never speak to a child like that, right? Yet, this is often how old we are when we form a lot of these unconscious thoughts that stick with us. The ones that we hate so much, the thought patterns that create anxiety, the thought patterns that create perfectionism. You're that 6-year-old that just wants to be accepted and loved. You're that 12-year-old that is absolutely terrified of rejection, of disappointing people. Remember that when you are so quick to bully yourself. How would you speak to a child? How much compassion could you extend to them? How much grace would you offer them when they are already hurting? How much love would you show them in that moment? That, my beautiful friends, is the lens through which I want you all to see yourself. Not as a victim, but as someone who is in dire need of compassion. Not someone who's helpless, but someone who has not necessarily been taught empowerment. Almost like you're remothering yourself, which a lot of us need to do. Not because our mothers were bums or they were terrible or they didn't give us what we needed, but because they were human. Our parents are just as human as we are. And sometimes the responsibility of reparenting falls completely on us to give ourselves that love and acceptance that we never got or never felt that we got. And that is what I have for you this week. Thank you, each and every one of you, for making this the most fun year of my life. And we've got more coming up this second year, more stories to share, more ways to help you understand yourself and your brain, and of course, more compassion. Have a beautiful week, my friends. I will talk to you next time. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of IVF This. If you like what you've heard, click subscribe and follow to make sure you don't miss an episode. And if you want to learn more, head over to www.ivfthiscoaching.com to learn how to work together.